Picture floating 250 miles above Earth, suddenly ordered to abandon your laboratory and hide inside an escape pod, all because your roommates are about to take a literal handsaw to the walls.
I mean, it sounds exactly like the plot of some claustrophobic science fiction thriller, right? But that is the actual reality of what just unfolded in orbit.
Yeah, let's run through the timeline of this event because the details are just staggering. So it's June 5, 2026. You're on the International Space Station.
Right.
And the Russian Zvezda module has this specific transfer tunnel that, it's been leaking for a while, but suddenly the leak spikes.
It really spiked. They are bleeding 2 pounds of breathable air into the vacuum of space every single day.
2 pounds a day. That is terrifying.
Right. So to fix it, the Russian Space Agency, Roscosmos, tells their cosmonauts to use a drill and a handsaw.
And in space.
Exactly. To manually cut out a load-bearing bracket.
And NASA looks at this plan. Well, they strongly disagree with what they see as a highly risky demolition. I mean, communications between the two sides completely break down at this point.
They completely fall apart.
So NASA orders its astronauts to seek shelter inside a docked SpaceX Dragon capsule. And this is a direct quote from the reports to send a message to the world.
And it actually worked. Roscosmos ultimately backed down.
Which is wild. But that standoff, it wasn't just some sudden technical disagreement over a piece of hardware.
Well, absolutely not. It was the absolute boiling point of a pressure cooker that has been simmering for years up there.
Well, welcome to today's deep dive. We have a massive stack of sources in front of us today for you, ranging from breaking news reports and historical timelines to some incredibly dense but fascinating NASA technical reports on human psychology.
Yeah, and our mission today is to unpack how the extreme isolation of space, combined with human nature and, earthly politics, is actively fracturing our off-world alliances.
Right. We want to look under the hood of that fracture. We really want to understand the actual mechanics of why these international relationships break down in extreme environments.
And ultimately what that means for humanity's future among the stars.
Exactly. And just a quick note for you listening. Our stack of research today covers some incredibly intense, highly charged geopolitical conflicts between the United States and Russia.
Very charged.
But we aren't taking any sides here or endorsing any national policies. We are simply acting as your guides to unpack the raw facts and the ideas sitting right in front of us in the source material.
Right. Our focus is entirely on the data, the historical events as they are reported, and the psychological mechanisms at play. No politics from us.
Spot on. And I promise we are going to keep the dense aerospace jargon out of this deep dive. If we hit a complex term, we will break it down into plain English right away.
It's a good rule.
Yeah.
Because to understand how we got to the point where highly trained astronauts are hiding in escape pods, we have to look back at how earthly politics slowly started creeping through the airlock.
Yeah, let's look at the historical timeline, because the International Space Station, or the ISS, it was originally this ultimate symbol of post-Cold War optimism, right?
It really was. Back in 1998, it was this shining, multi-billion-dollar example of former enemies turning their missiles into spaceships, working together to build something incredible.
But you fast forward a few decades, and the geopolitical landscape shifts dramatically. Our sources show tensions really spiking following the 2014 Russian annexation of Crimea. And then the reports describe the 2022 Russian invasion of Ukraine as putting a massive crescendo on these rising tensions.
And in response to that invasion, the United States placed heavy economic sanctions specifically designed to degrade Russia's aerospace industry.
And the response to those sanctions from the Russian side was severe, wasn't it? And extremely public.
Very public. Dmitry Rogozin, who was the head of Roscosmos at the time, openly pointed out that Russian thrusters are what keep the space station in orbit.
Right.
And he made a very explicit threat that if cooperation halted, the 500-ton ISS could experience an uncontrolled deorbit.
Okay, let's actually break down what an uncontrolled deorbit means, because it sounds very clinical, but it's genuinely terrifying.
It is.
Like, the space station doesn't just float magically forever. It constantly drags against the thinnest edges of our atmosphere, which, slows it down.
Exactly. And without Russian thrusters regularly firing to push it back up, gravity takes over.
Right. A 500-ton piece of metal falls to Earth. And without thruster control, it falls unpredictably. I mean, it could hit a city in the United States, Europe, India, or China.
Yeah, throwing around the threat of dropping a 500-ton metal structure on civilian populations, that is a devastating blow to international trust.
I can imagine.
And the erosion didn't stop there. We have to look at the 2018 Soyuz incident, A tiny 2-millimeter hole was discovered in a docked Russian Soyuz capsule.
Which is a nightmare scenario on its own. You know, you're living in a vacuum and someone finds a literal drill hole in the wall.
It's terrifying. But instead of treating it as a manufacturing defect or a mechanical issue to be solved jointly, Russian officials and state media weaponized it.
Wait, how did they weaponize a hole in the wall?
They baselessly accused NASA astronaut Serena Onyan-Chancellor of sabotaging the module. They claimed she drilled it so she could force an early return to Earth.
Wow. And NASA obviously dismissed those accusations immediately as completely false, right? Like lacking any credibility.
Absolutely. Geopolitical experts viewed the whole accusation as a massive maneuver by Russia to distract the world from their own manufacturing malfunctions.
Oh, and didn't they also have a widely criticized anti-satellite missile test around then?
Yes, exactly. But the damage to the working relationship on the station, it was permanently done.
So I am trying to wrap my head around this dynamic. It sounds like a high-stakes group project where two students absolutely despise each other outside of class.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. Like, how do they even keep the lights on? How do you jointly operate life support systems when your bosses back home are threatening to drop the station out of the sky?
Well, the dynamic you're describing is actually split into two very different realities. The sources highlight this fascinating divide between the people on the ground and the people at the top.
Okay, break that down for me.
So the working level flight controllers and the astronauts themselves, they usually manage to operate what they call nominally together. They are highly trained professionals executing incredibly technical checklists.
So boots on the ground or boots in space are fine.
Mostly, yeah. But the macro politics, the massive funding decisions and strategic directions made by national leaders, those create these insurmountable operational standoffs.
So the harsh truth is that space is not some utopian realm where humanity magically leaves its baggage at the launch pad. Our earthly problems just, well, they follow us up there.
They do, which leads to completely diverging priorities. I mean, NASA is heavily focused on long-term scientific research and deep space preparation.
Meanwhile, Russia has increasingly used their side of the ISS for rapid money-making opportunities, right? Like, they've hosted wealthy space tourists.
Yeah, and they even send up a film crew to shoot a commercial movie.
A movie on the space station.
Right, so you have two partners trying to drive the exact same vehicle, but they are steering toward two completely different destinations. It is a recipe for institutional gridlock.
But it's not just the institutional politics that are fracturing things. If we really want to understand that June 2026 handsaw incident, we have to look at the psychology.
Yes, we have to take that political mistrust and put it inside a tiny floating tin can.
Exactly. The psychological pressure cooker these crews are living in. Because political friction is heavily amplified by that brutal psychological environment.
Oh, without a doubt. What might be a minor irritant in an office down here on Earth very quickly transforms into a massive, mission-threatening fracture in orbit.
And the NASA technical reports we're looking at, they use a specific acronym for this. They call them ICE environments. Isolated, confined, and extreme.
Yes, IC environments. And the data coming out of those environments reveals a critical distinction in how human teamwork actually functions. NASA separates crew cohesion into two distinct types.
Okay, what are they?
Task cohesion and social cohesion.
Let's spend a minute here because this distinction is really fascinating to me. Think of task cohesion as like your ability to put out a fire with your coworker.
Right.
You might personally despise them, but you both know how to operate the fire hose, read the gauges, and execute the protocol. You get the job done.
Exactly. You survive.
Yeah.
But social cohesion is your ability to actually get along on a personal level.
Right.
It's having to share a tiny dining table with that same coworker for 9 months straight, listening to them chew their food, knowing you can literally never leave the building.
That sounds exhausting. And the reports show that task cohesion works perfectly fine for short missions. You can absolutely power through a 2-week Apollo-style sprint to the moon with someone you don't really like.
Sure. Anyone can grit their teeth for a couple of weeks.
But as these modern missions stretch into 6 months or 9 months or a year, social cohesion begins to aggressively degrade.
It really does. Deep-seated cultural differences, differing national values, and even varying gender norms create what the psychologists call fault lines. Yeah. And when a fault line forms, the crew literally splits into subgroups. You stop seeing yourselves as one unified group, like Crew Expedition 70.
Right, and you start seeing yourselves as the Americans and the Russians or the scientists and the pilots.
Exactly. And adding to that mental strain is the physical constraint.
Hmm.
The technical term is the net habitable volume.
Which just means the actual living space you can move around in, right?
Yes. And on the ISS, it is incredibly small. A smaller volume increases deep, primal feelings of crowding. It severely limits the crew's ability to just, go somewhere quiet, shut a door, and decompress after a stressful argument.
Okay, I am struggling with this part of the data, though. I have to push back here.
Go for it.
These are top-tier, highly trained astronauts. They go through years of psychological screening. This isn't just a bad family road trip in a cramped minivan. Why can't they just, compartmentalize and ignore the small stuff like they are trained to do?
Well, it is really tempting to view astronauts as superhuman. But we have to look at how the human brain mechanically processes long-term stress.
Okay.
The NASA data clearly shows that while crews are absolutely fantastic at handling sudden, life-threatening emergencies like a fire or a decompression alarm, it's the monotonous daily grind that destroys their resilience over time.
Ah, the classic death by 1,000 paper cuts.
Precisely. And this leads to a highly documented psychological mechanism called psychological closing.
Psychological closing, what is that exactly?
Well, as the daily stress builds up, your brain realizes that starting a physical conflict with the person holding a wrench next to you in a deadly vacuum, that is an evolutionary death sentence. You cannot fight your roommates.
So the brain subconsciously seeks a safe target to vent that frustration.
Exactly. Crews start to reduce the amount and the richness of their communication with the ground. They start displacing their negative emotions onto mission control. Yeah, they treat the ground team as an outgroup. It becomes us up here surviving versus them down there sitting comfortably at their desks.
So they use a disembodied voice millions of miles away as a consequence-free scapegoat for the friction happening inside the tiny metal tube. That is wild to think about.
It really is.
But it perfectly sets up our next major hurdle, the Mars problem.
Yes, the Mars problem.
Because if isolation, fault lines, and psychological closing are this dangerous, just 250 miles above Earth, where they have instant, real-time support from thousands of engineers, what happens when we send humans millions of miles away to Mars?
This is where the sheer physics of deep space flight completely alter the psychology. A mission to Mars features a one-way communication delay of up to 22 minutes, depending on orbital alignments.
Let's make that visceral for a second for you listening. Imagine trying to perform emergency surgery. You run into a complication, so you ask the chief surgeon on Earth a question. You then have to sit in complete silence and watch the clock tick for 44 minutes before you hear their answer.
That delay fundamentally eliminates real-time guidance from the dozens of specialized experts sitting at mission control.
Right.
And a Mars crew is likely to be very small, just 4 to 6 people. And those few individuals must possess the cross-trained expertise to manage an estimated 1,200 unique tasks entirely on their own.
Okay, here's where I see a potential silver lining, though.
Oh?
Yeah. In a normal job, we love autonomy. Everyone hates a micromanaging boss breathing down their neck.
Yeah.
Doesn't total freedom from mission control actually boost crew morale? I mean, who wouldn't want to be the undisputed master of their own spaceship?
Well, the psychological data actually supports that idea. And this is massive, but only under entirely normal, routine conditions.
Gotcha.
When things are going well, crews absolutely enjoy the independence. But space is fundamentally deadly and unpredictable. During a complex mechanical anomaly, or worse, a sudden medical emergency, the lack of real-time problem-solving support becomes a massive, fatal risk.
Right. You can't just Google how to fix a failing carbon dioxide scrubber when you are 100 million miles from the nearest replacement part.
Exactly. Or if someone is suddenly injured, you can't wait 45 minutes for a doctor to tell you how to stop the bleeding.
That is terrifying.
And furthermore, the NASA reports highlight a specific cognitive drain called task switching.
Task switching.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because they are so isolated, a deep space crew will have to constantly switch between highly autonomous solo problem solving and then pivot to asynchronously coordinating with mission control via those delayed messages.
Ah, I see.
The research shows that this specific kind of mental switching, bouncing between total independence and delayed dependence, is cognitively exhausting. It leads to major drops in operational performance.
So paint the picture of a Mars astronaut for me. You are millions of miles from home. You are stressed out. You are subconsciously annoyed at mission control because of psychological closing.
Right.
Your brain is exhausted from task switching, and you are living in a tiny box with people you might be forming cultural fault lines against.
It is arguably the ultimate test of human endurance. It pushes the human animal past every evolutionary boundary we have.
Which brings us to the big picture, looking ahead. When you combine all these severe psychological limits with the rapidly decaying geopolitical trust we talked about earlier, you realize something huge.
What's that?
The fundamental blueprint of global space exploration is shifting right now as we speak.
It absolutely is. We are in the middle of a massive transition period. The ISS is aging rapidly and nearing the end of its structural life.
Yeah, current engineering plans slate it to be nudged out of orbit and crash into the remote Pacific Ocean somewhere around 2030 or 2031.
And as the station prepares for its final plunge, the major players are all going their separate ways. Russia has heavily signaled plans to withdraw from the international partnership entirely.
To build our own station, right?
Yes, build its own sovereign orbital station, potentially partnering with China. Meanwhile, NASA is aggressively shifting its strategy to rely heavily on private aerospace companies.
And we are already seeing the mechanics of this shift in action. I mean, during that June 2026 leak incident we opened with, NASA didn't retreat to another government module.
No, they didn't.
They used a commercial SpaceX Dragon capsule as a literal safe haven. The future for the United States involves relying on these commercial partners not just to ferry crews, but to eventually build and launch entirely private commercial space stations.
Exactly. And you might be listening to this and thinking, well, why does it matter to me if Russia builds their own station? Or if a private company builds a hotel in orbit?
Right. Why should the listener care?
You should care, because whoever builds the architecture of space dictates the laws of space.
That is a profound point. The unified multinational era of space exploration, that grand post-Cold War dream of humanity stepping into the cosmos hand in hand, it's actively fracturing.
It is splitting into private corporate zones and fiercely competing national alliances.
So if we synthesize everything we've looked at today across all these sources, the core takeaway becomes incredibly clear. The International Space Station proved that international cooperation in space is mechanically possible.
Right. We proved we can dock the ships together, we can share the air, we can combine the solar grids.
But the current state of affairs proves that maintaining human trust in an extreme, isolated environment requires constant, rigorous psychological and diplomatic maintenance. Peace in space does not just happen automatically.
It takes an incredible amount of work.
So to summarize our journey through the data today for you listening, we started with a terrifying standoff over a handsaw in a leaky space tunnel.
We unpacked the brutal realities of living in a confined tin can, exploring how the brain's need for a scapegoat turns allies into outgroups through psychological closing.
And we explored how earthly politics are totally rewriting the blueprints for future Mars missions and the rise of privatized spaceflight.
Which leaves us with a critical, lingering question to consider.
Lay it on us.
If humanity cannot figure out how to stop fighting over a leaky transfer tunnel just a few hundred miles above our own planet, how will a diverse crew ever survive millions of miles away in the dark, with no one to rely on but each other? What does that really say about our readiness to become an interplanetary species?